screen. So you want to be able to watch what the news is saying. You want to have news headlines scrolling across your screens during that period. Now, obviously, since we've just covered it, it would be ideal if you could obviously have a block trade alert type idea also on your screens there. Block trade. Now, all of a sudden, going from a very, very simple basic idea, you've ended up with 6 screens. That's a lot of real estate for retail traders, isn't it? You've ended up with a basic setup of 6 screens. Now you know why when you're looking at, this is obviously for you guys, this isn't necessary for when you see all these screens in the banks, of course, it's because they're looking at different products. So on one screen, they would have the 5-year treasury. The next screen, they would have the 2-year treasury. The next screen, they would have the 30-year treasury. The next screen, they would have a such and such. The next screen, they would have a such and such. So when we start seeing the idea of screens, it's obviously depending upon what amount of management you're doing and what desk you're on. Because obviously, if you're an equity trader, then obviously watching the options flows, watching the index flows, and watching your own stock flows, you want to have your own stock flows from a chart, but you also want to see the tape, you want to see the read. Obviously, when we're talking about these ideas here, we're talking about things like, you might say, well, I need to see inside these trading view screens. I also need to see things like tape. I need to see order flow as well. So you maybe need to double up on those. So you need an order flow and you need tape information to try and understand what the hell is going on in terms of the actual chart itself. So when you start to look at those ideas, there, you can see how easy it is to end up with a rig that's maybe at 7 screens, 8 screens, 10 screens, 12 screens potentially, but obviously it's just getting stupid because you need to still be able to process the information on those screens. And that's about processing the information on those screens. As a basic setup, I always recommend 8 screens. As a basic setup, I would personally recommend 8 screens. You can easily do what you need to do with 8. Now, obviously, I'm talking about screens. Now, some people, I know Cliff set up, because Cliff posted his setup before, didn't he? Cliff uses the large screens, so it can obviously cover 2 screens on one screen itself. So the idea is to set up a bank that's usually something like this. And obviously, depending upon how it evolves, what a lot of the time happens is you end up putting on an extra bank of 2 up here. And that's what you end up as a screen. And that's what most bank screens that I've ever used. This is the type of setup you have here. You've got like 2 by 3 in the middle, 2 on the wings and 2 on the wings. So effectively, you end up with 10 screens in terms of a trade setup here. So that's what the normal is. That's what the normal is. And obviously, it's up to you, what you have visible. But I know for a fact, obviously, when I talk about, for example, the putting up the block trades and keeping an eye on it, that's a screen, right? It's going to be a screen. It's going to be difficult for you to do that without having a dedicated screen for that purpose. So I understand that if you're using one screen, it's a real estate use that you're maybe not able to actually accept and use. But you've also therefore got to understand that you are subjecting yourself to some limitations. And that's what you're kind of looking at. That's what you're kind of understanding. That's what you're trying to kind of get your head around, is this idea that you've got to still work within the limitations that you yourself have. It's not cheap, because to run this number of screens, you've also got to buy video cards, right, Cliff? You've got to buy video cards. You've got to have video cards to accommodate screens. I think that's probably why Cliff uses the big screens, because you can obviously have more real estate per one input into your box. And if you can run one large screen that can cover effectively the same real estate as 2 small screens, then you still only need one plug into your video card. So you could maybe run a set of 4 off of one video card without any trouble whatsoever. but it's not actually 4 screens, it's 2 screens, but they're big enough that they're 4 screens. So this is, you know, the way I would always look at it is as a minimum, I would say you need 2 screens. Would everybody agree with that? As a minimum, I would say you need 2 screens. Because you need to be able to get your trading screen up and your order screen. You need 2 screens. 4 screens, 6 screens, 8 screens, 10 screens. Anything above 2 is obviously on a need to use basis. Anything above 2 is on a need to use basis. Because you don't need any more than 2 screens. It's nice to have more than 2 screens, but you don't need to have more than 2 screens. Or an iPad, Gene. You know, if you've got an Apple iPad, you know what I mean? Absolutely fantastic. But what you could do, and without all joking aside, Gene, is if you had an Apple iPad, you could take your block trades and have it set up on this little side screen here, which is connected to your Wi-Fi. Instead of having it hardwired, you could have your block trades in there because you're not interacting with that screen. You're not interacting. You're not having to do anything with this. It's not like it's using up a lot of graphic pressure or power or anything like that. You could easily have a block trade alert in there, or you could have your TV news. You could have your news on this, right? You could have your news channel on this scrolling away if you wanted to. That could be an iPad. That could be your iPhone potentially. No reason why it shouldn't be your iPhone or your iPad. And that gives you a second screen if you've only got a single screen and you've got a small screen like this. Perfectly reasonable, guys. Perfectly reasonable. You're limited by your budget. You're sometimes limited by your space, of course. If you're running these ideas out of a tiny 6x4 box room, you know, having 8 screens in a 6x4 box room, you'll come out radioactive, guys. You'll come out radioactive. You'll have a tan. My God. You know what I mean? You'll glow in the dark. They'll put a Geiger counter on you and you'll sound like that bloody tick strike. You'll be clicking away like nuts, you know? Anyway. I think that's maybe what the tick strike is. Maybe it's just a Geiger counter for guys coming off screens. Anyway, how did that buy on oil do eventually, guys? Come on, seriously. How did that buy on oil do? The buy on oil, which came from 20s, has just traded into the hidden selling at 67.80s. How good was that trade? Was it worthwhile, $600, Cliff, just reading about the block trades? Was that $600 worthwhile just paying attention to that block calendar spread that came in? Is that the reason why it managed to make 600? No, that's not the reason. 200 lot calendar spread isn't the reason why oil prices went up. The 200 calendar spread, however, was highlighting that they saw an opportunity, the same way as you see opportunities. But their opportunity isn't for a 2 lot. Their opportunity was for a 200 contract deal. It's a good opportunity. It's a good opportunity, isn't it, when you see it? That is blisteringly good, guys. That is a brilliant trade.